What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and I spent way more time, effort, and money putting this together than I would have liked, but I regret nothing. This is Assetto Corsa modified into one of the best experiences I've had with this game because the nostalgia is just so incredibly strong. So here's the rundown of mods, which I'm going to go ahead and link everything down below so you can put everything together, because I'm going to talk about getting this to all cooperate nicely, because it takes some doing. First of all, there's groundwork of any Assetto Corsa installation these days: content manager, custom shader patch at the minimum, and then Soul and Peer, you might as well go ahead and add those on as well. You technically don't need the last two, but you probably should, especially if you play this game with any sort of regularity. From there, you're going to want to bust out your wallet again and get that RaceSim Studios Classic Endurance Pack number 1, the Virtual Racing Cars Pavey Long Hood S in Beamer V12. You can't go ahead and pick up all of the early 2000s prototypes. They'll also work as well, but those two cars are period correct for the rest of the field. And then United Racing Designs for the Darche EGT1 Evo, the Mares GTR EGT1, and the Mercedes CLR they sort of released years ago for free. You want to go ahead and also add in the Kunos Porsche 911 GT1-98, because of course you do, but blammo, you add it all together, you get 9 different cars from the absolute golden era of Le Mans, and it is fantastic. Except it's not quite that simple, because once you start adding in all these different mods from these different sources, you end up with cars that are distinctly different than one another, even though in theory they should all be fairly close in terms of performance. The VRC cars are from a totally different planet. The United Racing Design cars don't believe in a concept called drag, as well as they have tires that are rocks, and the GT1-98 from Kunos is just slow. As I didn't want to go ahead and start changing values in the physics, I went to Content Manager and decided, you know what, we're going to try and make this work through there, and actually, pleasantly surprised, things actually turned out fairly decently-ish, and made this experience far more enjoyable, because now they actually have cars that perform similarly. You can find my preset down in the description. You should just be able to load that up in Content Manager, and if you have all of these cars, it should apply the restrictor and ballast settings, or alternatively, you can copy the values that you see on screen. I keep changing these though, because I keep feeling like, oh, well, maybe we can go this way, or maybe we can go this way, but I feel fairly happy with them right now. However, that's not the secret sauce entirely. If there is a secret sauce, that would be the tires. After trying basically every combination of tires I could throw at these cars through Content Manager, I decided that the best route for me was to take the RaceSim Studios GT1 tires and apply those onto the United Racing Designs cars, as well as the GT1-98 from Kunos. That really left the two VRC cars as needing some work, because changing the tires didn't really work out. It didn't slow the cars down, and it just made them really pointy to drive. Instead, I ended up doing a combination of restrictor and ballast, because I felt like when you just ballast the car, yes, it gets the performance in the ballpark, but then it starts to feel more like a tank and less like a prototype, as well as the tires become a bit of a hassle, because the tires weren't built for the car to weigh an extra 100 kilos, essentially. So that combination there ended up, I'm somewhat happy with it. Then there's the Mercedes CLR, which is just a problem. As far as I'm aware, I don't think that car was ever actually technically fully finished by United Racing Designs, so it's kind of a little weird. And in particular, that car just doesn't care about aerodynamics. Like, drag does not apply. It just races in a vacuum somehow, which means that the thing is ludicrously fast. The way to slow it down is put in a big restrictor on it. I was actually pretty shocked that I ended up needing to go that high, and it's still pretty darn rapid in a straight line. However, I felt like the car has 0 brakes to begin with, so having this car kind of represent a straight line monster, you know, built for Le Mans, you know, it was actually a pretty good compromise. So it's one of those cars where it's going to either be really good or really terrible depending on the circuit, and I'm fine with that. The one thing I'm not really fine with, though, is I didn't find any way to actually make the Porsches viable, and I didn't feel like nerfing the rest of the field would be the way to go with that, so I just kind of left it as is and decided, hey, you know what, it's fine that there's cars that are 2 seconds a lap slower, 3 seconds a lap slower, because that's just kind of what this era was. And You know, when you compare the GT1-98 to the Mercedes CLR or alternatively the Toyota GT1, like, you know, I feel like that's a fairly fair compromise. It shouldn't be as fast as those cars in particular. So really, with some ballasting and restrictors, stuff in Content Manager, as well as swapping the tires around again in Content Manager, this experience goes from, okay, this is 4 separate mods, essentially, that technically should go together but really don't gel at all, to, yeah, this is actually pretty fun. And one other suggestion, it's not as important as getting all the ballasting and restricting right, is the setups. They really run across the board. You know, some cars have 30 liters of fuel, some of them have 50 liters of fuel, some of them have soft tires, some of them have hard tires. You know, some of them are low downforce, some of them are high downforce, some of them are geared normally, some of them have ridiculous gearing to make the car do like 240 miles an hour for some reason. It's just one of those things where you can make things a little bit better just by tidying that up and making sure that's a little bit consistent. You know, everybody on the same type of tires, everyone with the same type of fuel load, you know, same type of downforce level, just to make things a little bit more fair and get the performance to be more consistent. Now, on the topic of the McLaren F1 that Kunos made, in theory, it should go in here, and I guess you technically can. I did put the RaceSim Studios tires onto it and just saw where it would come out, and it's slow. It's not competitive. It's not really in the same class, which is one of those things where kind of a little bit weird, but at the same time, by this time, the cars, you know, that we got here in Assetto Corsa now, you know, 1997 through 1999, the short tail McLaren F1 was replaced. For 1997, they had the long tail car, which was just much better, much faster, although even then it wasn't competitive with the Porsches, with, you know, obviously the Toyota GT1 and the CLR at the very end, you know, extrapolating things further. So it is what it is. But anyways, after all that, was it worth it? I would say yes. I will say yes with the caveat of, I'm not a huge Assetto Corsa fan. I'm not a huge Assetto Corsa fan because I think it's a terrible racing simulator. Full on, full stop. Has nothing to do with the driving, has nothing to do with the visuals, everything to do with the AI being the worst in sim racing, everything to do with this game is just stuck as a 30-minute racing sim, which, yes, is how I typically play the game. However, with these cars in particular, are not the experience that I actually fully want out of the game. But setting aside my bias against Assetto Corsa, this is the best experience I've had with this game outside perhaps the Shutoko Revival project, which is just one of those things which also checks all the nostalgia boxes. In my opinion, this is the greatest grid in racing history, and a lot of games have this content already in them. However, almost every single time it's so piecemeal. You end up with like 4 cars. Well, you know, when you put everything all together, here you got 9 cars. And when RaceSim Studios releases hopefully a classic Endurance Pack 2, you're probably going to have 3 more cars that they're going to find. Riley and Scott win. But, you know, like, you add it all together and it just becomes such a more engaging experience. And I'll also say, yes, there is the fact that Assetto Corsa is like the best looking racing sim around, and turning it up to 4K. I can't record in 4K, unfortunately, but, you know, playing in 4K at night with custom shader patch and you know, everything, it's just like, man, if only this was actually a good racing sim. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm setting aside my bias, but at the same time, I'm letting you know where I stand. I think that's fair. If you don't have a problem with Assetto Corsa, highly recommend that you try it out. If you do have a problem with Assetto Corsa, highly recommend you try it out, because you should drive late 90s GT1 and LMP cars anytime you get a chance in sim racing, which is all the time, actually. So you should drive these cars rather than whatever else you're driving. Unless it's a Group C car, in which case I'll forgive you. Or a late 60s F1 car. Or a late 90s open wheel car. Some variety. Anyways, drive that, not GT3. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.